Glyceride line. It opens with the story of Yui, a young woman who talks about her life in the city where she currently resides, which has a view of the magnificent Mount Fuji. Every time she looks at it, she feels her mind clear, and if she stares at the view for too long, she almost doesn't want to go home because the lower part of her house has been converted into a barbecue restaurant named Daruma. Inside the house, it is always dim and gloomy due to the thick oil mixed in the air, with oil stains on everything from the pillars and walls to the doorknobs and household items. Everything is covered in heavy oil residue, and since her mother is no longer around, no one cleans at all. The bed in her room is also wet with oil, and no matter how many times she washes her clothes, they remain stained with oil. Furthermore, her father, named Takeshi, has a lot of oil on him and constantly emits a specific odor. In the house, there is also her older brother Goro, who is 2 years older than her and has a very bad temperament. Whenever their father is away, Goro often likes to bully her, and he has some strange habits. Sometimes he sneaks into the kitchen and drinks salad oil with delight. One day, Goro saw her and warned her not to tell their father about this, or else she would definitely be in trouble. The walls are stained with the disgusting oil from her father, and her brother is just like oil. Thinking about these things makes her feel the change in her living conditions a lot. The more exhausted she feels, the more she can sense the oil. While she was in that room, she could still sense the oil level, and she wrote on a piece of paper that the oil level was now at 50%. She referred to it as oil vapor because it is the level of oil that accumulates in the air. Every day, the oil level in her house keeps increasing, and now it has risen to 60%. As time passed, Goro, who liked to sneakily drink salad oil, was entering puberty, which became a problem for him because the hormones and oil he consumed caused his face to be covered in acne, spreading from his forehead all over his face. When he squeezed them, oil would shoot out, leading his schoolmates to tease him, calling him pockmarked face. He was also bullied in various ways. During that time, Yui secretly saw her brother feeling bad about his disgusting acne-covered face, and he was even bullied by the boys to the point of crying. That day, Goro confronted Yui, accusing her of secretly watching him and laughing while he was being teased by his friends, which made Goro furious, and he physically attacked her until their father had to intervene. Goro then turned to scold their father. He said that his situation was because of their father, who made him covered in oil. He demanded responsibility from their father, leading to a big argument between them. After that day, Goro refused to go to school and locked himself in the house, spending his days drinking oil and doing nothing. One day, when the oil Goro bought was about to run out, he called Yui to go buy more oil, and asked her to change his oil-soaked mattress because it was covered in oil. However, Yui told Goro that she had no money left, but he wouldn't listen and yelled at her, saying their father must have money. How could he not? When Goro didn't get his way, he started to get frustrated, pressing his hands to his temples and twisting his head. The pressure from his palm combined with the acne on his face caused one of the pimples to burst, shooting oil out and hitting Yui's face. She exclaimed that it was disgusting, and when Goro heard that, he fell silent for a moment before asking again if she just called him disgusting. Yui, who was wiping the oil off her face, didn't respond. He asked if she hated his fat that much, and suddenly, Goro grabbed Yui, saying that if she was so disgusted, she should try tasting it. He then pulled her into the room and climbed on top of her. He used both hands to squeeze all the pimples on his face with all his strength, causing the disgusting oil to shoot out in streams. The oil sprayed and dripped onto Yui's face, making it almost impossible for her to see Goro's face. When he opened his mouth to scream, more of the oil dripped into her mouth. Seeing her in that state, Goro asked how it felt to have the oil oozing from his face onto hers, as she had chosen to look down on him. He also threatened to kill everyone, saying he would eliminate anyone who crossed him. Goro then began to choke Yui for calling him disgusting, and it seemed he was on the verge of losing his mind. Fortunately for Yui, just before she could lose consciousness, their father rushed in to save her. hitting Goro on the head with a frying pan, knocking him out. The fabric was cut for 2 customers at the barbecue restaurant who came in to order the restaurant's famous new meat dish. However, Takeshi informed them that the meat had run out since yesterday, because in reality, the famous meat was Goro's. While lying in the room, he sensed the oil vapor and noted that it must be at 70%. After the events of that day, he began to tremble and dreamt of Yui, seeing the beautiful Mount Fuji, which was now enveloped in oil. The volcano was about to erupt, and what spewed from the chimney was oil, flooding the entire city. Suddenly, an announcement blared, stating that the oil vapor level was now at 90%. Please listen to the fire fuel warning, which was like a repeated alert. One day, when Yui woke up from a dream, she found that her face was rapidly breaking out with pimples. After that, she began to isolate herself, locking herself in the house. One night, her father asked her if she was feeling unwell again, and suggested that she go for a walk outside. However, she found her father annoying, and told him to go away. At that moment, she mentioned that the fat level in their house was at 80%. In the middle of that night, she dreamt of Mount Fuji erupting with oil again, and the oil flooded her body, submerging her. Just then, she jolted awake to find her father pouring oil into her mouth. She noticed his terrifying face as he urged her to drink the oil. When she woke up, she pushed her father away, almost choking on the oil that had been forced into her mouth while she was asleep. She then asked her father what he was trying to do. He apologized, saying he thought she might be hungry, so he gave her oil to drink. Yui snapped back at him, stating that no matter how hungry she was, she would never drink that oil. And she realized that her father had been forcing oil into her mouth every night while she was asleep. But her father tried to tell her that he didn't do that, before he suspiciously excused himself to go to bed. This made Yui understand everything, and realize the reason for her breakouts. After that night, she had to be constantly cautious because she couldn't sleep carelessly. In the middle of the night, she often got caught when he opened the door and acted surprised to see her drinking. The situation with the oil in the house continued to worsen to the point where her father had to close the shop and spent all day drinking oil. This made him increasingly bloated due to the rising oil levels in his body. Especially as the levels increased, the situation became more severe. After bathing, there would be layers of oil on his body, and the sheets in the cupboard were more oily than before. Then, a strange noise echoed in the house. When Yui came down to check, she noticed that her father was using a knife to chop off his own leg. However, the wound was not bleeding. Instead, yellow oil was oozing out. At that moment, the vapor level had reached 100%. Walking along a lonely road at night, Karago is driving through a valley and dense forest to visit her grandmother, who lives alone in the woods. The grandmother had asked her to come because she felt scared and wanted someone to help her. However, the road leading there is winding and does not reach her grandmother's house directly. Kana has to get out of the car and walk down a small hill. Before reaching her grandmother's house, there is a stone bridge crossing a river. As Kana approaches her grandmother's home, she sees the bridge and wonders why her grandmother lives in such a desolate place, devoid of people. As she is about to cross the bridge, she encounters someone standing in the middle of it. She wonders why someone would be standing there at such a late hour, and thinks that perhaps this person is a friend of her grandmother's. But as she walks closer to greet them, she realizes the terrifying truth that the person she approached is not a human. It is the spirit of an old man who still lingers at the bridge. Upon realizing that it is not a person, she quickly runs away and knocks on her grandmother's door in panic. Meanwhile, the spirit of the old man follows her slowly. Fortunately, her grandmother opens the door to welcome her before the spirit can reach her. Kana entered the house and asked her grandmother what that was. The grandmother explained that the spirit was Uncle Kingoro, her real uncle, who passed away when she was still a child. Previously, the spirit of her uncle did not appear this often, but after her grandfather passed away, she had to live alone, and the spirit began to show up every night, standing at the bridge and refusing to leave. The grandmother understands that the departed spirit has likely been waiting for her alone for a long time. In the area that the grandmother mentioned, both of them could hear the voices of many spirits calling for her, echoing around the bridge. Kana asked her grandmother why they could hear so many voices, and the grandmother explained that those voices belonged to all the people in the village who had died and had not yet found peace. They were only haunting her grandmother, trying to pull her spirit down to the river. The grandmother then suggested that Kana try standing to see the spirits that were calling for her. When she saw the spirits, she could hardly believe her eyes that such supernatural occurrences existed. The grandmother complained that the spirits would stand there calling for her all night, making it impossible for her to sleep. If that were the case, Kana would likely be unable to sleep as well. Seeing this, the grandmother began to tell Kana stories from her childhood to pass the time. She recounted that she was born and raised in this house and had lived there her entire life, which now felt almost devoid of people. However, in the past, the village was very lively, and there were many strange customs, including the way funerals were conducted. The first funeral that the grandmother could still remember was that of Uncle Kingoro. Kana had just encountered this during the funeral. Everyone in the village would gather by the river to send off the deceased. At that time, she was with her mother on the bridge, when someone shouted that Uncle Kingoro was coming. Her mother whispered in her ear to keep an eye on Uncle. Suddenly, Uncle's body floated down the river, and as his raft was about to pass under the bridge, the current unexpectedly pushed the raft against the bridge, causing the raft to capsize, and Uncle's body sank into the water. The villagers who witnessed this remarked that Uncle Kingoro was very unfortunate to fall from the bridge like that. As Uncle's body slowly sank beneath the water, the villagers felt very sorry for him. The grandmother asked her mother what had happened to Uncle, but her mother replied that the river was both wide and deep, and if the body did not float with the current, it would indeed be a pity, because if Uncle's body had remained on the raft, it would have found peace by now. Some who heard her mother say that asked if they hadn't tied the rope to the raft properly, but it couldn't be done because it was a custom that had to be strictly followed. Later, another person in the village died. This time, a young man named Shokichi, who passed away at the age of 20. At that time, the grandmother was 16 years old. She continued to recount that Shokichi was the tallest man in the village, standing about 2 meters tall. Despite his size, he had a kind heart and was her first love, and they had already been engaged. However, Shokichi fell from a tree on the mountain and died before their time. During this funeral, because Shokichi was so tall, the villagers had to use 2 rafts and tie them together for the ceremony, even though the grandmother was deeply saddened. According to tradition, she had to observe. Shokichi's body floated down the river, but it got caught on the edge of the bridge, causing Shokichi's body to fall into the water. Moreover, due to the condition of Shokichi's body, with his long arms and tall stature, it caused his body to float downstream and get stuck under the bridge. At that moment, the grandmother noticed for a brief second that it seemed like Shokichi was opening his eyes and looking at her. His body remained stuck under the bridge for a moment, until someone in the village shouted that they had to do something because they couldn't let the body be swept away by the current like that. The villagers under the bridge used sticks to move Shokichi's body until it floated downstream and sank into the river, just like Uncle's body. Importantly, the grandmother emphasized that she definitely saw Shokichi open his eyes and look at her, wondering if he had something to tell her. She didn't know, but the gaze seemed to urge her to hurry and follow him. The villagers who had drowned were calling for her, which is why they became spirits and appeared to call for her every night, making her feel scared. At the same time, Kana looked at the bridge again, and this time encountered Shokichi's spirit turning to look at her. The grandmother remarked that soon she would surely have to die, but Kana told her to stop thinking and speaking like that. The reason she returned here today was to take her grandmother away from this place with her the next day. However, the grandmother said it was too late because she was about to die. Upon hearing this, Kana quickly went to comfort her grandmother and told her to stay strong. But the grandmother seemed to know her fate well, so she asked Kana that if she died, to help bury her under the ground. Regardless, she wanted to be taken to float on the river. After finishing that sentence, the grandmother collapsed to the ground and took her last breath, ultimately passing away. Then the group jolted awake in the car, because everything she had seen was just a dream, while she was napping on the way to visit her grandmother. After that, she began her journey again until she reached the end of the road, and got out to walk to her grandmother's house. Along the way, she felt that everything was very much like in her dream, until she reached the bridge where she had seen Uncle Kingoro's spirit in her dream. At that moment, she noticed an old man standing on the bridge, just like in her dream. She tried to hurry past, but the old man told her that her grandmother had just passed away. Upon hearing this, she turned to look at the old man and realized that he was not a ghost or spirit, but a friend of her grandmother. After that, Karageni rushed into the house and called for her grandmother. But it turned out that her grandmother was no longer in the house. As she walked out the back of the house, she encountered the spirits of the villagers who had gathered on the bridge to wait for her grandmother's body. Finally, her grandmother's body was placed on a floating platform, and as the body floated past, she noticed that her grandmother had opened her eyes and was looking at her before the body hit the edge of the bridge like other bodies. And then her grandmother's form. Slowly, the body sank into the water, and the spirits of the villagers felt joy, because now the grandmother and grandfather would finally meet and get married. On Karageni's side, upon seeing this, she hurried down under the bridge to look for her grandmother, but all she could do was watch her grandmother's body slowly submerge into the water. She thought to herself that her grandmother must have been looking at her just now. As she had this thought, the voices of the spirits in the area fell silent, before she could see the shadows of all the spirits of the villagers being released and floating away together. It was as if all the spirits were waiting for just her grandmother, who was like the key to allow them all to reach peace.